Imagine standing at the edge of a dark cave, the sound of water echoing from deep within. You've prepared, you're ready. But as you descend into the darkness, something feels off. The deeper you go, the more the world above fades until suddenly, you can't find your way back. Hours pass, and those waiting for you don't know of the dangers below. What if you never emerge? What if the cave hides more than just rock and water? This is Fatal Tragedies, with the story of cave divers lost deep underground. In the serene depths of Mexico's Kalimba cenote, 4 thrill-seeking divers embarked on what was meant to be an exhilarating 80-minute cave dive. But what began as an adventure would turn into a harrowing fight for survival, with only 2 divers narrowly escaping the clutches of the abyss. In December of 2004, a group of 9 diving enthusiasts prepared for their second plunge during a vacation in Mexico. Their mission was to traverse the intricate underwater labyrinth of Kalimba cenote, following its main lines and threading through shorter jump lines, before surfacing briefly at the enchanting Bosch Chin cenote, only to retrace their path back. Among them were Gene and Bill Downing, a couple with an impressive resume of over 300 cave dives spanning nearly 3 decades. Their expertise was matched by 2 close friends, each boasting over 20 years of experience in navigating the enigmatic underwater world. But what they didn't know was that this dive would test their limits in ways no certification or preparation ever could. Kent Hirsch, with 125 dives under his belt, and Michael Nast, boasting 75 dives, had spent years forging their bond underwater. Together, they ventured to Mexico, eager to explore the labyrinthine 228-mile expanse of the Sac-Acton cave system. Known for its sprawling underwater tunnels and crystal-clear beauty, it was a diver's dream and their next challenge. Kent and Michael teamed up with seasoned couple Gene and Bill Downing, not just for company, but because their gas consumption rate aligned perfectly. In cave diving, this isn't just a technical detail, it's a survival strategy. Each diver's air consumption, influenced by size, experience, and natural breathing rhythm, determines how far and how deep a group can safely venture. The golden rule: use 1/3 of your tank on the way in, 1/3 for the return, and keep 1/3 in reserve for emergencies or the unexpected twist that the underwater world loves to throw at you. Meticulously prepared, the group had already dived these cenotes just 2 days prior. This time, they were set to follow a carefully coordinated plan. Team 1, led by a professional guide, went into first, laying markers to map the route. Their efficient breathers would push further into the maze before signaling the turnaround point for Team 2, comprised of Kent, Michael, and the Downings. The plan was seamless, their skills undeniable. But in the shadowy depths of this system, even the most experienced divers are at the mercy of the unknown. Team 1 navigated the cave system with precision, following its main line to the endpoint. There, a short jump to the Paso de Lagarto line, a key route in their underwater journey. A quick detour down this line brought them to the main Bosch Chin line, where their adventure reached a brief interlude, a chance to surface and marvel at the ethereal surroundings before retracing their steps. During this initial leg, the guide placed personal non-directional markers, small disc-like tools nicknamed cookies. These markers served as both navigational aids and a subtle communication system with Team 2, indicating the path taken and jump lines installed. Team 2's mission mirrored that of Team 1, albeit with a critical difference. Their gas limits meant that they would likely need to turn back upon reaching the Bosch Chin line. This plan positioned them as the first group to exit, with Team 1 following behind. As predicted, when Team 1 reached the connection, they noticed their cookie had been removed, a signal as prearranged that Team 2 had already passed. The protocol was simple yet essential. The first team to exit removed the cookie, ensuring the second team would clean up any installed jump lines. This system left the tunnels pristine for future divers, maintaining safety and respect for the site. With the guide leading the way, Team 1 meticulously pulled all jump lines as they exited. After a grueling 99 minutes submerged in the underwater maze, they finally re-emerged into the sunlight, completing their journey as a team of 5. But as they surfaced, the question lingered, what had become of Team 2? After surfacing, Team 1 scanned the area, but there was no trace of Team 2. They should have been waiting, having exited the tunnels ahead of them. Panic began to set in as the gravity of the situation became clear. The guide quickly drove to the nearby Grand Cenote, hoping they'd emerge there by mistake, but there was no sign of the missing divers. Back at Team 1, they hastily prepared to re-enter the tunnels. 30 minutes had passed since they surfaced, and with Team 2's air consumption rates, time was running out. Suddenly, bubbles broke the surface, and 2 divers emerged, gasping for air and frantic. What they revealed was a tale of missteps and near catastrophe. Things had started smoothly for Team 2. Following the main lines as planned, the group marveled at the serene beauty of the caves. Bill Downing captured the mesmerizing scenes with his underwater camera, while the others carefully navigated tight restrictions, confident in their abundant air supply. They progressed along the Kalimba line, made the jump to Paso de Lagarto for a brief swim, and reached the Bosch Shin line. At this point, Michael checked his air pressure and announced they had reached the 3rd mark, the signal to turn back. They pulled the Bosch Shin cookie and began their return journey. However, at the Paso de Lagarto main line, something went wrong. Despite the clear marker, the group inexplicably turned left instead of right. What should have been a quick 3-minute swim to the Kalimba jump turned into an ill-fated detour. Unknowingly, they continued down the line for a staggering 1,400 feet, ending at the furthest point to the Paso main line, nearly 3,000 feet from their intended exit. Realizing their mistake, the group faced a dilemma. Ahead was a 70-foot gap to the Grand Cenote main line, which would lead to safety just 300 feet away. Kent took the lead, connecting his safety line to the end of the Paso line and began searching for the Grand Line. But after several tense minutes of swimming, his line came up short. Forced to return to the Paso main line, Kent spotted the faint lights of his team moving away. Alone and running low on air, he frantically swam to catch up. Meanwhile, Michael, recognizing the dire situation, decided it was time to turn back. A quick calculation showed their only chance of survival was to retrace the path on the Kalimba Cenote. There were no pockets of air in these tunnels. If their tanks emptied, it would mean certain death. The Downings reached the same conclusion. With air levels critical, they decided to follow Michael, trusting that the known route offered their best shot at survival. Staying calm was paramount, as panic would only accelerate air consumption. After a grueling 25 minutes of tense swimming, the group finally found the jump back to Kalimba and were finally on the main line leading to the exit. Every breath counted as they pushed forward, determined to escape the underwater labyrinth that had nearly claimed them. Bill's heart raced as he checked his air gauge. It read only 200 psi. Every breath felt weaker, more strained. He swam toward Jean, signaling their dire situation. Without hesitation, she handed him the emergency mouthpiece from her tank. The two began to share air, their movements synchronized and deliberate. When they reached their first tight restriction, Jean went through first. Bill held his breath, waiting his turn before carefully squeezing through. Once on the other side, he quickly found Jean and reconnected to the lifeline of air. Together, they moved slowly, trying to conserve energy and stretch what little air remained. Up ahead, Michael was in trouble. His tank was almost empty and he could feel the pressure drop with every desperate pull for air. As Jean and Bill passed him, Michael saw they were already sharing air and knew they couldn't spare any for him. Just then, panic began to creep in as his breath grew shallow, when suddenly a beam of light appeared behind him. It was Kent. Kent wasted no time. He handed Michael the emergency mouthpiece from his tank and steadied him with a reassuring grip. "Stay calm," Kent urged, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. They had no room for panic now. Every second mattered. The two began swimming together down the line. With over 1,000 feet left to the exit, they prayed that their air would hold out. Kent stayed close to Michael, offering quiet encouragement as they pushed forward through the dark, narrow tunnels. Meanwhile, Bill and Jean were fighting their own race against time, Gene's tank was nearly depleted, and they were still 15 minutes from the surface. Every turn, every restriction was another hurdle they had to overcome. Finally, they saw the faint shimmer of daylight filtering through the water. Breaking the surface of the water, Bill and Gene gasped for air. Gene's tank had less than 500 psi left. Just a few more minutes and it would have run dry. If they had waited for Kent, they wouldn't have made it out alive. On land, they frantically told the guide and others what had happened. "We saw their lights," Gene said, breathless. "Kent and Michael were behind us. They can't be far." The waiting began, each second feeling like an eternity as they hoped the remaining 2 divers would also break free from the underwater labyrinth. The guide and 2 divers wasted no time. Armed with extra emergency mouthpieces, they re-entered the tunnel, their lights slicing through the murky water. Just 250 feet in, the beams illuminated 2 still figures. Neither Kent nor Michael was moving. It was a devastating sight. Both men had drowned. They'd been so close to safety, a mere 5 minutes from the surface. The realization was crushing. If only they had turned back without searching for the Grand Main Line. If only they had realized their mistake a minute or 2 earlier. If only Michael had stayed calmer, conserving his precious air. Any of these could have changed the outcome. An analysis later revealed critical lessons. Each diver should have placed their own cookies to mark the path. This shared responsibility might have helped someone recognize that they were heading the wrong way. Moreover, the team should have noticed sooner that the turnoff hadn't come when expected. Bill and Gene's survival was credited to their experience and calm under pressure. Bill's familiarity with cave diving and Gene's remarkable ability to conserve air had likely saved their lives. But Kent and Michael weren't as fortunate. They'd succumbed to the ever-present danger of cave diving. An unforgiving sport where even small mistakes can turn deadly. Kent and Michael died doing what they loved, fully aware of the risks that they embraced with each and every dive. Speaking of risks, when 2 brothers set out for a day of adventure and cave diving, the last thing on their minds was that one of them might not make it back. It's hard to imagine a highly skilled Air Force pararescue diver falling victim to a single wrong decision. But that's the harsh reality of cave diving. Mistakes here don't come with second chances. Michael and Paul Hayden grew up exploring an old water well cave in Goss Canyon. As kids, it was their playground, a place to escape the scorching California summers with their siblings. They would splash around in the deep flooded well and wander through the dry cave sections. The entrance was unassuming, a small dark hole about 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall, near La Crescenta, California. Inside, the path was straightforward, a short horizontal crawl of 50 feet, followed by a 30-foot descent down a sloping hill. Just 150 feet from the entrance, the cave opened up to a flooded pool surrounded by dry ledges and hidden nooks. For the Hayden family, it was a magical spot where youthful curiosity thrived. Over time, the boys ventured further, exploring the deeper tunnels and caverns within the flooded sections. As they grew older and more experienced, their ambitions also grew. Paul, the more adventurous of the 2, became a seasoned scuba diver and Air Force pararescue instructor. With nearly 15 years of experience in an elite rescue force and over 20 years of service, he was a master of diving. Known for being cautious, prepared, and highly skilled, Paul had every reason to feel confident leading their latest exploration. Their mother was reassured by their history with the cave. This wasn't their first dive, and they knew the terrain like the back of their hands. But even the most experienced can underestimate the risks lurking in familiar waters. On September 17, 2000, Paul Hayden was ready for his next big adventure. He planned to dive deeper into the tunnels and shafts of the old water well cave, pushing beyond the limits of their past explorations. Carrying his scuba gear and a mounted GoPro camera as a light, he hiked with his brother Michael to the pool area. Paul had 2 hours of air in his tank, plenty of time for what they thought would be a safe and controlled dive. Michael stayed behind in the main cave to monitor his brother's progress. The brothers had a simple but reliable system to stay connected, a rope tether tied securely to a rock. Michael would give a couple of tugs on the rope to check on Paul, who would respond with 2 tugs of his own to confirm that all was well. At first, everything went smoothly. The rope fed out as expected, and each tug was met with a reassuring response from Paul. Michael watched the line closely, ready to assist if needed. But about 20 minutes into the dive, Michael pulled the rope twice and waited. This time, there was no reply. A sinking feeling gripped him as he tugged again, harder this time. The line was tight. Too tight. Paul wasn't responding. Michael's mind raced. Was his brother stuck? Was he out of air? Acting on instinct, Michael yanked the rope with all of his strength, desperate to free Paul, but the line wouldn't budge. Time was slipping away and Paul's air supply was dwindling. With just minutes to act, Michael abandoned the cave and ran for help. He knew his brother had less than 90 minutes of air left and every second counted. Michael burst through the doors of the La Crescenta Valley Sheriff's Department, breathless and desperate for help. His brother was trapped and time was running out. The response was immediate. Deputies from the LA County Sheriff's Department, along with the Montrose Search and Rescue Team, mobilized without hesitation. The LA County Fire Department joined them, forming a full rescue team. ATVs roared to life, carrying the team over the rugged valley to the cave's entrance. Once there, the divers wasted no time. They plunged into the water, determined to bring Paul back. Earlier that day, Paul had been eager to push the limits of their usual cave exploration. This wasn't just any cave. It was a part of an old water well system from 1915. The caves and tunnels, formed by natural erosion and man-made shafts, were now submerged and treacherous. Over time, stagnant air and decay gases had made the environment even more perilous. The system was a maze of sump pools over 100 feet deep, connected by narrow water-filled tunnels. One of these tunnels led Paul to a shaft only 3 feet wide. The tight space made maneuvering difficult, especially with his scuba gear strapped to his back. As Paul swam upward, his camera light captured a silvery glimmer above, a small air pocket at the top of the shaft. He surfaced cautiously, aware of the dangers of these pockets. Cave air could be a toxic cocktail of decay gases and low oxygen levels. Normally, Paul would carry a lighter to test the air before removing his regulator, but that day he hadn't brought it. The camera recorded every moment. Paul's light revealed the confined space above him as he removed his regulator and took a breath from the air pocket. That single breath would seal his fate. The footage from Paul's GoPro was haunting. It showed the shaft wall, followed by the splash as he submerged underwater. But something was immediately wrong. Paul never put the regulator back in his mouth. Instead, he drifted downward, sinking to the bottom of the shaft without any signs of movement. Within moments, Paul was gone. What could have caused such a sudden and catastrophic outcome? A single breath of air from the pocket above, rich in carbon dioxide, was all that it took. For many, it seemed hard to believe that one breath could lead to death so quickly. After all, with a full tank of air, most would have thought that they could simply replace the regulator and swim away. But in environments like these, the danger was far more insidious. Air with over 10% carbon dioxide could cause immediate loss of consciousness. This was carbon dioxide poisoning, and it happened fast. Normally, the air we breathe contains about 0.04% of CO2. The natural diffusion process in our lungs allows excess CO2 to leave the bloodstream, keeping the body balanced. But in an air pocket filled with CO2 at dangerously high levels, the diffusion process reversed. Instead of releasing CO2, the lungs flooded the bloodstream with it. Within seconds, the blood became highly acidic, a condition known as acute respiratory acidosis. This rapid shift in blood chemistry led to unconsciousness and ultimately death. In an industrial setting, colleagues might have been able to intervene, administering oxygen and emergency care. But in the isolating depths of a flooded cave, unconsciousness was fatal. Paul's full tank of air was of no use as his body sank into the water. By the time Michael realized something was wrong, Paul had already passed. His lifeless body lay at the bottom of the shaft, a tragic end to what should have been a day of adventure. This tragedy underscored the unique risks of cave diving. Even highly skilled and physically fit individuals like Paul, an experienced scuba diver and Air Force pararescue expert, could fall victim to its hazards. Unlike open water diving, cave diving requires specialized training, countless hours of supervised experience, and a deep understanding of its deadly risks. And finally, we have the disappearance of Ben McDaniel. Ben McDaniel, born on April 15, 1980 in Memphis, Tennessee, was the oldest of 3 siblings. While his parents enjoyed success and wealth, Ben's life was going in the opposite direction. The late 2000s were particularly tough for him. First, he tragically lost a 22-year-old brother to what they initially believed was a stroke. Ben had been close to his brother, spending time together despite their age difference, and was the one to find him unconscious at their home. He tried desperately to save him, but his brother was pronounced dead when paramedics arrived. To make things even worse, it was later revealed that his brother's death wasn't due to a stroke at all, but a drug overdose from unprescribed medications. At the same time, Ben was dealing with a messy divorce and his struggling construction business, which was hit hard by the economic downturn. By the end of it all, Ben had racked up $50,000 in IRS debt and had to move back in with his parents. It was an incredibly tough few years that left a noticeable mark on his personality. Seeing the toll it took on him, his parents suggested that he take a break and head to their beach house in Santa Rosa, Florida to regroup. Living there quickly proved to be the right move. Within weeks, both his parents and his girlfriend noticed a change. He was starting to look forward to the future again and was less caught up in his past struggles. One of the things that helped him heal was scuba diving, a passion he'd had since his teenage years. Now, with plenty of time and the perfect location, he dove into it, becoming obsessed with exploring the local dive spots. Among all the places he could dive, he loved Vortex Spring the most. Although the area had plenty of freshwater springs, Vortex stood out. It was home to the largest diving facility in Florida and had crystal clear water with a temperature warm enough that divers only needed wetsuits. For beginning divers, the spring offered plenty of wildlife and space to practice, with more experienced divers being able to explore a massive cave at the bottom of the spring. This cave, extending 300 feet from the surface to a depth of 115 feet, was a real draw. But to get access to the deeper part of the cave, divers had to be cave certified, showing the dive shop their credentials. The cave wasn't meant for the faint of heart. It stretched over 1,600 feet through limestone passages, some so narrow that divers had to remove their tanks and twist their bodies to squeeze through. Back in the 90s, the dangers of the cave led to a series of deaths, prompting the state to consider banning diving in the spring unless safety measures were put in place. That's when the steel rebar gate was installed, blocking access to the deepest and most dangerous part of the cave, requiring certification to enter. In the weeks leading up to August 18th, Ben had become a familiar face at the Vortex Spring. His truck was often parked outside at the dive site, with Ben either by the water or underwater, diving. On the night he was let through the gate by dive shop employees, they didn't wait for him as they sometimes did, leaving for the night. They were under no obligation to stay, but they'd often stay out of courtesy. The next morning, Ben's truck was still parked in the lot, but nobody thought much of it. The parking lot was busy, and the staff had other things to focus on. However, by Friday, his truck was still there and nobody had seen Ben around the shop or the spring. Concerned, the dive shop employees called the police. When the police arrived, they sealed off the spring to ensure that nobody else had entered and began searching the area. In Ben's truck, they found his wallet with $1,100 in cash, his cell phone, and dive logs. His logs showed that he'd been diving in the cave and had mapped out the areas that he'd explored. As they continued the search, they went to his parents' beach house and found his dog inside, hungry, clearly not having been fed for a few days. This was around the time Ben was thought to have disappeared. With this information, both the police and the dive shop staff were convinced that Ben was still somewhere in the cave, likely having drowned. Cadaver dogs were brought in and led authorities to the water's surface, which seemed to confirm their fears. Divers, many of them experienced cave divers, volunteered to help in the search. What started as a mission to find Ben quickly turned into a body recovery effort. But this rescue mission was far from easy. The conditions in the cave were treacherous, and experienced divers warned that navigating the narrow passages could be deadly. In fact, within the first few days, one diver had a close call, narrowly escaping drowning after getting stuck. Despite the risks, the search continued, with Ben's parents and girlfriend waiting anxiously by the spring. Days passed, and divers combed through the large and small tunnels, eventually turning their attention to tight fissures and crevices. In cave diving, it's not uncommon for a diver to panic and become wedged in a narrow space, making escape nearly impossible. Despite all the efforts, the only clues they found were 3 tanks, all filled with regular air, odd because of the depth Ben was diving. At such depths, a different gas mixture is typically required to avoid nitrogen narcosis, and it was baffling that his tanks didn't contain the right mixture. After 4 days, the search intensified. A well-known cave diver, Ed Sorensen, was contacted. Ed was a recovery specialist with over 2,500 dives under his belt. Though he was on an expedition in the Bahamas at the time, he dropped everything and flew to Florida the next day. When he arrived, other divers had already scoured the cave, but Ed disagreed with their assessment that further searches would be too dangerous. He conducted 3 dives, covering 1,700 feet of the cave, far more than Ben had mapped in his logs. Even with all of his experience, Ed found nothing. There was no sign of Ben, no equipment, and no signs that Ben had traveled further into the cave. No disturbed silt, no signs of fish feeding on decaying matter, nothing. The lack of any sign was strange, especially considering Ben's size, 6'1" and 210 pounds, and the fact that he wasn't nearly as experienced as Ed. It seemed highly unlikely that Ben could have navigated those difficult passages. Despite all the efforts, the mystery of Ben McDaniel's disappearance in Vortex Spring only deepened. As the weeks passed without any solid leads, Ben McDaniel's parents grew desperate. They tried everything, hiring the man who originally mapped the cave to search for him. But after 7 dives, he could only apologize for finding nothing. Then they put up $50,000 to use a remotely operated underwater vehicle, but it could only reach the same depth as the divers had already explored. The search continued, with 16 divers scouring the cave for 36 days, but still, no trace of Ben. The search efforts shifted to the surrounding areas. Despite scouring the swamps, creeks, and nearby rivers, the police found no sign of Ben's body or any evidence that could explain his disappearance. Some speculated that Ben had faked his own disappearance, overwhelmed by personal stress, but this didn't fit with his optimistic plans for the future. By 2011, it seemed unlikely that Ben was still in the cave, especially after months of searches by top-tier divers. Determined, Ben's parents put up a $10,000 reward, which later increased to $30,000. But this led to tragedy. Another diver, perhaps enticed by the reward, ventured into the cave, got lost, and drowned. The incident only intensified criticism, especially from experienced divers like Ed Sorensen, who had been involved in recovering the body. Frustrated with the lack of progress, Ben's parents turned to a private investigator. They discovered disturbing information about the dive shop, including its owner's criminal record and violent behavior. In 2011, the dive shop owner pled no contest to charges of assault, but his life ended tragically when he fell down a set of stairs and later died from head injuries. Then, diving legend Jill Heinerth became involved. Initially skeptical that Ben had drowned in the cave, she explored the site and reviewed Ben's maps. She now believes that Ben might be buried deep within an inaccessible crevice, his body hidden out of sight. The last verified sighting of Ben was on August 18, 2010, just before he filled his tanks at the dive shop. Despite numerous theories ranging from foul play to the possibility that Ben staged his own disappearance, the fact remains that no definitive answer has emerged. With every lead coming to a dead end, the disappearance of Ben McDaniel remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in diving history. If you found yourself in one of these divers' shoes, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in our next episode.